Professor Jason Hotchkiss. I'd like to just take a few minutes here at the mid-course of grief and loss, death and dying, just to provide a little bit of guidance, a little bit of instruction on some of the things that just been learning through the years in terms of working as a hospice chaplain, having worked in pastoral ministry as well, and just guiding students in this class. And so just want to take a few moments for that. Just first of all, a few housekeeping items. Remember, when I do give you grading on any of your assignments, I always give some comments. Now, I don't always give extensive comments on the smaller assignments, but I always do give you feedback. And especially in this class, this is more than an academic class. This class is about learning about the feelings and the process of grieving. Grief has been described as a psycho-spiritual process. So there's all the emotions involved. Of course, there's our families and relationships, but there is the spiritual process of grieving. And one of the insights I think that has been really helpful in my journey is just beginning to see grief in kind of a relationship, a dialogue with gratitude, with feeling grateful for things in our life, whether it's losses associated with things like divorce, or losses as to do with friends or life transitions. One of the things that has come through in the films is, for instance, the film Inside Out really focuses on some aspects of grief and loss that maybe are not brought up as much. The process of moving, loss of connection with peers. Even in the movie, the young girl loses connection with her hockey team. And those are really important aspects of grief and loss that we need to remember. So just remembering to review and integrate the feedback that I give, especially on the film assignment. I like to provide you instructions on, how you've been able to use the film in your grief journey. That's what I hope, the depth that you would get out of this. Of course, looking at any of these films can be inspiring, can help us to understand grief, but we also want to see the films and these other resources as tools in the grief journey as well. Really, there's been great discussion. I encourage that to continue, when you post, also responding to others and having a dialogue. That's really, I think, where a lot of the learning comes in this class. And so I want to, just as we're, mid-course, to kind of give you a few guidance, areas of guidance in terms of sort of conceptually understanding grief, and I'm talking a little bit about here grief in conversation with gratitude. Grief also, while being grateful for these people that have been in our lives, these experiences as well. So as you remember from your learning here, acceptance is sort of like that first step in the grief journey. And one of the things I notice with students in this class is describing deep losses, the loss of a father at a young age, the loss of a relationship, the impact of divorce, both as a child and then also those who've experienced divorce personally. Those are very important aspects of that. And so in any of this, whether grief or loss, acceptance is a big part of that journey, important task on that journey. I remember when my son was a little bit younger, I was trying to give him some visual tools for understanding how to move with the flow of life. Life comes along to us, things are happening. We don't get to choose grief. I mean, it's like grief chooses us. And I'm talking to my son about how, when things are going along in life, instead of sort of resisting the flow of life, but going with the flow of life, rather than sort of swimming upstream, when things happen in my life, or remember just different transitions in pastoral ministry, in career, and that kind of thing. Being kind of moving with the flow, listening to what the Spirit says in the process. And the second being really working through the pain. Especially here in American culture, I think one of the big challenges is that negative emotions, sadness, sorrow, grief, fear, guilt, these emotions, there's a lot of escapism here in our culture. We want to sort of not feel these emotions. And I think one of the beautiful thing that students are seeing in this class and other sessions of it is engaging with the grief. One student described using, how again, going back to the movie Inside Out, how that movie has been kind of a tool in the grief journey. And so that's another aspect of it as well. So accepting the painful emotions. I'm going to post a short that I like. I like shorts that sort of guide us in our spiritual lives and then in grief and loss. And the short is called Baggage. And the concept is people wrestling with these things that they are part of their journey, that they're essentially carrying in their luggage, and they're valuable experiences, and some of them negative, some of them very hard, breakups, even betrayals that can happen to us, or things that sort of are part of our experience, whether it's depression or other aspects of life that can come up. And so one of the outcomes of the film is really thinking through how is it that, instead of going and checking these things and essentially trying to not feel them, is to bring them into our experience and to accept them. And they're essentially part of the valuables that we're bringing along with us in our life. Well, number 3, really, and this is coming from Ward's work, is adjusting to the new environment. And this is another aspect that students have been moving through here, is thinking of the new environment. And so one student talked about, as a young girl, loving their home and their beautiful house, and then dad moving into another area, maybe even was kind of a good financial move for the family, but nonetheless having to adjust to leaving a treasured home. I mean, we think of these things as smaller in the scope of things, but still nonetheless have their impact. And one particular author talks about distinguishing sorrow, experiencing sorrow. A friend moves out of the area, that connection isn't there as it was. But then the more gut-wrenching griefs, experiencing a divorce, losing a parent. That's definitely a theme that's been coming out here. And also, even those more difficult things like miscarriages, and trying to come to terms with those things as well. So adjusting to the environment is another aspect of it. And I've really appreciated learning just about the shift. One of my favorite books on emotions is Healing Through the Dark Emotions, written by Miriam Greenspan. Excellent resource. The wisdom of listening to grief, fear, and despair. And so one of the aspects that the writer talks about is that grief is really an invitation to look deeply at the self. So we're in grief at the crisis level of it, that feels kind of like we're losing ourselves in a sense. And people have described that who talk about grief to me in hospice and in this class as well. But feeling the depth of it, being able to accept it, and I think also addressing those really critical questions that are almost unanswerable. the why question. And one of the key aspects is being able to come to terms and say that, we may never really know that why. Why did my parents break up? Why did Dad have to die when I was only 3 years old? These are just unanswerable questions. Of course, they're going to come up, but we don't want to stay stuck in that place. The mystery of loss and death are not yours to understand through rational and analytical mind, is one thing that Greenspan says. And of course, the Psalm 30. One may lie down weeping at nightfall, but at dawn there are shouts of joy. And so there's also a moving with the flow of life in terms of when sadness comes, feeling it, letting it move through one's body, letting it move through one's spirit, and then having time to also continue to lead one's life. Tears, just tears are so important in the process now, especially those intuitive grievers, but each one is important to allow the tears and allow you to move through your process in your own time. It's surprising when you really think about the grief and loss has been studied, not as much as it should be studied. But one of the things that we're finding out is there's kind of two aspects. The first is that every person grieves differently. We all go through the journey differently, and we all have tools, things that help us in the journey. Some people talk about the value of nature and walking outside. Others talk about going and having coffee with a friend. Others talk about enjoying a show that makes one laugh and take a break from the grief. Exercise. So many ideas, but that the two poles of both honoring the feelings, the grief, and then also acknowledging the gratitude. And so I want to just leave with a benediction, words that I wrote at the recent Camp Heart Care Conference. It's a conference here for families and kids in grief. And I share this for you as well, that may the grief, the deep grief that's manifest in that tiny seed that dies into the ground, may it, with loving support and time, gradually become green with gratitude. Appreciate all your writings and your reflections. This work is very important to your journey. It's more than an academic class. I think if you really engage it, that you will grow both in your faith and just personally as you move through life. Great to see everyone's comments online. We'll certainly see you out there in Moodle. Have a great day.